was her first big, and actually following Henry Giarello gave her the screaming heebie-jeebies for a long, long time. If anybody can follow, thank you. I've heard about their next speaker's work for many years. A lot of work they've been doing with the organisation she represents. I didn't actually meet Mary until just a few months ago when we began working together on exposing paedophile rings, etc. Mary Moss has worked with NAYPIC, which is the National Association for Young People in Care, for the last 3 years. The organisation is run by under 25s and aims to improve the conditions of young people in care and after care, to promote the views and opinions of young people in care, and wherever possible to support and develop local groups. Ladies and gentlemen, Mary Moss.
Thanks. By the way, also, you missed a bit, which was that all the people who work with NAYPIC have been in care themselves and are under 25. Basically, I'll explain a bit about what we do. We do training in, from the consumer's point of view, of social workers, foster carers, the police, residential social workers, etc. And we basically tell them the reality of what we see as the care system. Basically, as the consumers, we think that we should be listened to, because it's like anything. If you eat something, you know if it's good. No scientist can tell you that it doesn't taste good if they haven't tasted it. If you're the consumer, you know what's going on in the system. I explained a bit about my personal experience of abuse. I'm 20 years old, and in my own personal experience, I've been abused by my father at 13, and it was never proved, even though I went through 14 court cases. Basically, it's the same old thing. It's his word against mine. So most children who have disclosed are taken into care, and I was taken into care along with my 6 brothers and sisters. I was put into God knows how many children's homes, from Kent to Sussex, West London, South London, Middlesex, and eventually, because I got myself in so much trouble with the police, as you do, I ended up in an assessment centre, which was meant to be for 6 weeks, but I ended up there for 6 months, because your behaviour, if you get into that kind of system, gets gradually worse, right? So you start off being abused, and then you end up being abused by another system. What happened on the first night I was there was I was asleep, and I woke up to find an agency staff on top of me. To cut a long story short, like people have explained before, the fear of telling, because you've had previous experience where people don't believe you, too many court cases, etc. You just don't want to do it. So I know about that fear of not telling the establishment that abuse goes on within the system too. Then I found out that he was actually abusing all the other girls in that assessment centre. So we all told. Basically, the staff was asked to move, and nothing was done about it. That's how abuse goes on in the care system. Nothing is really done about it. Because I think too many establishments are too scared to say that they've got some rotten apples within their authorities. Now, we all know, I explained about sexual abuse organised in the care system. Now, we all know that child pornography sells, selling kids for sex sells. How do you get young people to organise regular sex? Now, if you're an abuser with little money and little power, parks working in systems which deal with children may work. But if you have influence and power to bribe and blackmail, to keep yourself under cover as something easily obtained, and that when there is a market for something, for example drugs, you can bet it's organised. To keep young people shut up, you need them in a situation where they are not believed, they are scared to complain, or they can't complain. I think many people know the care system has many loopholes in it. It's easy to get access to it if you know the right people. Imagine a system where, say, someone like a director was a child abuser. We all agree that it's a cross-section of people. Nobody knows, they could be in the police, they could be a director, they could be, a farmer. It doesn't matter, it's a cross-section of people. But imagine you have a system where a director is into little boys, for example, and he has the power to pick the family placement officer to place children into different homes, for example. So he knows what he wants and he knows how to organise it. He gets his family placement officer. It may be a vulnerable young boy who's maybe been sexually abused before. He places him in a certain children's home where he's already placed one of his other men, for example, the officer in charge, because he knows what he's doing, it's quite organised. The officer in charge may be into it too. The officer in charge picks his staff. The staff may be into it too. So therefore we have a whole cross-section of people who are actually involved. Therefore, when that child wants to complain, who do they complain to? They can't complain to another staff because they're involved. They're safe. Now, what happens when they're starting taking these kids to parties and to friends' houses and to things like that? Basically, if the young person can choose to do one of two things. If they complain to a staff, the staff is going to either threaten them in some way, subtly or not so subtly, with violence, or basically they can get on with it. Now, if you're in a situation where you've already got kids who've been abused and have got little self-worth and are encouraged to have low self-esteem, then abusing them is not very hard to do. And it's very easy to keep them shut up about it too. Basically, as Sergeant Page, Ed Page said, ask a man who knows where to get a kid. You have to be proactive about it. And I think the top of the list would be an organised children's home. Now, sex makes money. Money it needs protection. Protection comes in all forms. People poking their nose in the fire basically get burnt. If this is organised, which we have evidence, which is word of young people, which I don't know, some people class that as evidence, some people don't class that as evidence. But we have evidence that there is organised sexual abuse within the care system. And when you're trying to investigate that, it's very dangerous. You can face violence. You can face subtle things like, if you're talking about it being very organised, a lot of people having a lot of influence, sudden cuts in grants maybe, blackmail, promotion, demotion, and of course there's the press. If the press want to write something, it's like JR says, digging up the dirt on people. A lot of people know how to do that, keeping people buttoned up or else. And it might seem far-fetched or even wildly imaginative, but it's a way of making money, and to acquire something that is illegal takes some wildly organised tactics. And if you don't want to be caught, then, you organise. But basically the thing is, like I said about it being far-fetched, it's very easy for me to say that, but people often don't believe it. And I have had 3 years of experience of talking to young people about abuse in the care system. I've also been abused in the care system. So when I talk to kids who've been in the care system, they either have been abused themselves in one way or the other, or they will know of people that have been abused. It's rife, and I think people have got to know that it's rife. And I think until we start accepting that it is rife in the system, nothing can be done about it. But like I said, you always get people like it's even, for example, in a conference like this, right? It's meant to be truthful. We're all coming here because basically we've got something to say. And as a young gentleman said to me last night, who actually was in care, he said, someone stood up and I think they were in the wrong conference, You were saying that it goes on in the care system. I actually vouch that it does go on in the care system. And that's what he said, and he was in care. Yeah? So all these people who will always stand up, like as a child, you will always have somebody to stand up and say, no, she's lying. No, she doesn't know what she's talking about. No, there are other things that make her evidence untrue. Yeah? The word of the child has got to be believed, and it's got to be taken seriously as evidence. basically, I mean, I think that if we had an organisation with the same cross-section of people, with the same power involved.
Right, this is a bit of a break. I'm recording this on a new tape machine, and so I'm just turning over. It does. I'm 53 now, by the way. Birthday yesterday. Yeah, so it'll come back to the same thing. But yeah, trying to find this tape yesterday.
Getting rid of the problem, I think, would be a lot more equipped to deal with it. To be proactive, as Paige said, is a very good thing. But it is dangerous investigating things, as we've come across. But basically, if we had an organisation with judges, MPs, the police, like somebody said yesterday, you know, where are the judges? Where are the power-making people? They're not here. And until we get those people there, you know, nothing's really going to happen. We're all just going to shout about it and say it goes on, but nobody with power is going to be able to do anything about it because they don't know about it or they don't believe it. Like I said, people have got to realise it is through a cross-section. What I was disturbed about Sergeant Bennett yesterday standing up was, yeah, he said that we talked to him about what we believed was something going on with organised sexual abuse. And the reason why we talked to him is we're not stupid, you know. We don't go and talk to every copper and we don't go and say, excuse me, you know, there's some organised sexual abuse going on, because we actually know that it is in a cross-section of people, and we actually know that the police are involved as well as any other cross-section of people are involved. I'm not saying all the police are involved. If you let me finish, I would have said people are involved all through the line, right? Now, we went to Sergeant Bennett because of the simple fact was we thought he could help us. But it seems from yesterday him standing up that that trust is gone, because he seems to be more interested in protecting his colleagues instead of getting up and saying, okay, we understand it goes on. We're not the people that do it. We know some of our colleagues do it. And as Sergeant Page said yesterday, he said the police don't like it when we bust them too. You've got to realise it goes on. Social workers, everybody. And that's when we start organising to stop it. When we get all those people together and people that aren't scared about grassing up their colleagues. Well, I explain how kids who've been abused are ideal victims. Well, it's quite obvious. They've been abused. I've talked about that. They will have little self-worth and they think it's the norm to be abused after a while. The rights of young people in care, Section 18 of the 1980 Child Care Act. A child should, this is one of the few rights which most young people actually don't know that they've got. But a child should be consulted before any major decision is made about them, and their wishes and feelings should be taken into consideration. Very seldom used, I think. The punishments for rebelling, most young people don't know about this, their right, and they often don't know that they have any. The punishments for rebelling are too high, and it's extremely difficult to complain, or at least to someone who can do something about it. Having worked in NAYPIC for 3 years, like I said, we came across so many abuse cases, and we've said time and time again, year after year, there is abuse in the system. But nobody believes it without something like credible, something in a piece of paper, like something like research. So we decided, okay, we would do an abuse in care study group. We started this. The purpose of research was basically, one, to look at and define abuse. Two, to look at the nature and extent of abuse within the care system. Three, to look at the attitudes and responses of the social services department and others to the problem. 4, to look at the remedies available to young people and make recommendations on what should be available. An immediate problem that we encountered was designing the framework for abuse research. What is the definition of abuse? Talking to social workers, psychiatrists, psychologists, lawyers, foster parents, colleagues, and young people who were in and ex-care. Defining abuse depended on your own perception. We spent a lot of time attempting to categorise types of abuse, for example, emotional, physical and sexual abuse. We tried fitting cases into frameworks, but in the end it proved impossible. In the end, we arrived at a very simple solution. We made abuse self-defining. We decided to do a pilot study among young people aimed at asking the victims themselves how they defined abuse that they had suffered. We looked at 30 cases who have come to us in the last 3 months. We have produced case histories of their time in care and asked questions like, do you consider you were abused in any way within the care system? We also asked whether they had complained, what the responses of their carers were, and whether they were satisfied with the result. Here are some of those cases. There was some wardship examples and abuse of wardship. I don't know if you know, and for people who don't know what wardship is, it's when the court makes all the decisions as to what a child does within the care system. So if a court makes a decision that they would be in a secure unit, then you have to go back to court to get them out of the secure unit, basically. So it's the judge making decisions. We came across a case, a young person was warded by the court for sexual abuse. She was kept locked up for 4 years and has twice been raped, once tortured horrifically. Allowed no contact with anyone outside the unit and is now too frightened to complain. This breaches Article 5, 6, 8, 10, 11 and 13 of the European Convention of Human Rights. Article 5, right to liberty. This young person has been locked up without trial for 4 years. Right to security as a person. This young person has been locked up in a situation where they are regular strip searched and body searched. Article 5.1. Rights to be told in language that they understand the reason for their detention. This young person, like many others, has never been told properly the reason why she is being detained in a secure unit. Article 6.1. Right to trial before imprisonment. This young person is a ward of court, thus it is not necessary for the social services to obtain a secure order, nor is it necessary for the young person to be present or heard when the judge gives his direction. Article 6.3. Rights of accused person. As she is being held in custody, we must assume that she is that status, although we accept that there is no actual charge. All rights under this article are denied to her. Article 8, right to respect. Right to respect for her private life and family life, her home and her correspondence. I don't have to explain this, but can anyone give me a valid reason, legally, morally, social work, or any other grounds which justify splitting up this family, even though social services recognised her bravery in disclosing and taking all her brothers and sisters into care? Her reward for this was to have her access to them denied. And this often happens. Article 10. Right to freedom of expression. She has been denied access to her local councillor, MP, the press. She has even been prevented from contacting or joining NAYPIC. As before, Article 11, prevented from joining NAYPIC, breaches this article, freedom of association with others. Article 13, right to effective remedy before a national authority. Only Social Services Department can refer her case back to the High Court, unless the young person is made a party to the procedures. She cannot approach the court herself. No ward of court can actually challenge the decision of the judge. She has no remedy at all. Another example of a young Jewish boy, ward of court. The care authority sent him to a Church of England boarding school. He asked for all religious instruction because he wanted to make his bar mitzvah. The social worker recommended at his review that if his religion was causing a problem, consideration should be given to changing it to Church of England, without any consultation with the young person whatsoever. This not only breaches the Convention of Human Rights, but also breaks a number of English laws. Another young person who underwent 27 moves in 14 months was moved away from his home area in Manchester to the south coast of England. In 2 years he'd been there, no attempt was made to keep in contact with his family, none of his roots maintained. One girl sexually abused and was taken into care when she was 8 years old. She was sexually abused by 2 different sets of foster parents. Finally, she was sent to an adolescent unit where she was further sexually abused by staff. There was a total failure to address or provide therapy for the original sexual abuse. No investigation or recognition of abuse in the foster homes. She identified abuse in addition to sexual abuse as loss of innocence, exposure to life experience and neglect, all seen by her as abuse that she had suffered at the hands of the care system abuse. Another young person who has been abused by the system identified areas of what she called system abuse: lack of permanency, frequent moves and changes of carers, and getting a criminal record, which is something a lot of us ended up with. Another young person who had been sexually and physically abused, she complained. No investigation took place and a member of staff resigned. No further action was taken. She felt equally angry and abused at the total lack of recognition of the abuse that had occurred, as much as the sexual abuse itself. As she herself says, they never said I was lying or making it up. They just seemed to totally ignore it, and the staff wouldn't talk to me about it. System abuse. Another young person was abused by her dad, taken into care. She disclosed abuse 2 months after she was in care. She used to have meetings to decide which was, what was going to happen to her. And basically, her dad was invited to these meetings, even though she had already disclosed that he'd sexually abused her. He was never confronted, and he was allowed to make decisions and be party to decisions which were going to affect her life in care. Also, she ended up with anorexia because she'd been abused, and she was basically self-mutilating. Anorexia is one of the common things. She was with her father in one of these meetings to decide her future, and basically, she was 15, and I think it's very good when a 15-year-old actually says, recognises that they've been abused. It's quite a breakthrough to say, well, I recognise I've been abused, I want to deal with it, I want some therapy. She didn't act out in any violent way, she wanted therapy, that's what she asked for. They sent her to Hill End's psychiatric unit, adolescent psychiatric unit. We asked the social services not to send her there. We made other recommendations, but in the end, they sent her there. One night, somebody set off a fire alarm, and all the girls were sedated because they didn't know which one it was. Sedation, we also hear from other young people that have come in, is something that is frequently used in these establishments. But the thing is, it's very difficult to complain when you're absolutely stained out your brain on like Gactyl or something. We also came across abuse of secure orders. A black girl had been placed in secure accommodation. She agreed to an order for 1 month only. The young person made complaints of racial abuse by staff whilst in there. The staff didn't like this. But members of the secure accommodation panel refused to extend her secure order after 1 month, and they wanted her to move on. Staff, together with social services, wanted her to remain in a secure unit. They obtained legal advice, and in the final sentence of the legal advice they received, it said, "Anyway, if all else fails, we'll ward her." A clear conspiracy between 2 social services departments to not just abuse their power, but to misuse the law and the courts to get their own way. We do have documentary proof of all this, by the way. All this, of course, was in the best interests of the child, even though she was never consulted. We ended up defining 2 categories of abuse. Abuse by carers, direct or indirect sexual, physical or emotional abuse of young people by anyone in a position of carer to a young person. Abuse is any action that physically, sexually, emotionally or mentally harms or undermines the young person's right to protection from harm, or any action which constitutes the undermining of a young person's sense of self-worth. System abuse, the denial of a young person's human rights, legal rights or civil liberties. Any action that undermines security, that generates happiness by any authority or administration charged with the duty of care towards the young person. Any unjust, callous or malicious treatment caused by these procedures or practices of those authorities. The casework examples, those were some of them, but you should bear in mind that in most case studies, young people were subject to abuse in both categories. Their current placement were often in a reaction to the symptoms generated by the effects of different types of abuse. For example, one of the girls was put into care at 12 and a half years old. They said she was beyond parental control. She disclosed that she was sexually abused whilst she was in a home, and this was basically ignored. In the next 18 months, the girl was moved to a number of placements. Her increasingly disturbed behaviour, absconding, non-school attendance, promiscuity, etc., resulted in negative responses from the social services department, periods in observation and assessment centres, and even secure units. Lack of planning, lack of consistency of care and of carers, no consultation and lack of permanency, failure to listen or to acknowledge previous abuse, physical and racist abuse within the system. In all, 21 moves in 18 months. Finally, she was put into secure accommodation at age 14 years old. At 1 week after her 15th birthday, she was sentenced to 1 year imprisonment, her first criminal conviction for stealing, to survive whilst on the run from the secure unit. In this case, we can identify abuse in both categories. Whilst in care, system abuse by self-definition, 20 different types of abuse. Is it a wonder she still remains sane? Many don't. How many young people are discharged into mental health systems and penal systems each year? Who knows? If you've got any answers, put them on a postcard to the Department of Environment. We came across overuse of restraint. Basically, the use for sexual gratification. We came across a hell of a number of cases, but young people actually being restrained, say for example just with their knickers on, being dragged down corridors, being held down on the floor by male members of staff with no female present. I see people nodding at the back. But, it's true, a lot of it's used for sexual gratification. And there's nothing really you can do about it because they will always write down that it was restraint. And as the last one was talking about, it's terminology that you use, you know what I mean? And basically, if you have no access to your files, which is another human right, I think, that we should have, it's very difficult to prove any other. Racial abuse is very common in the system. One case we came across, I don't know how you explain, but we looked at one unit and 85% of the inmates were black over the past 3 years. Sexist and verbal abuse, very common and adds to low self-esteem. Independent units, neglect. Young people basically left to get on with it. Independence unit is something like when you're 16, you get put into an independence unit to teach you how to cope with life. Basically, the descriptions of filth, squalor and deprivation in these places in which young people lived revealed many of the worst cases of neglect within the communities for which young people and kids were taken into care, and yet the social services put them back to where they started, or even worse sometimes, and they're not prosecuted. Young people as young as 11 or 12 can be locked up on the direction of a judge. Denied legal counsel, no right of appeal, denied access to independent reps or advice, denied access to local councillor or MP, and can be locked up for years. Press cannot even help, because the law says you cannot print anything on a ward of court without permission from the courts. When NAYPIC or the Children's Legal Centre are approached, we are forbidden to help by the court order. If a social services department wishes to obtain it. One case, we just received a letter saying that we'll be in contempt of court. Then we were forbidden to talk to another girl as we received an injunction because she talked to us. Now we're being sued for libel by our director of social services because basically he said he was more interested in covering himself legally than he was the young people. So we're being sued for libel, but I think it's a clear indication by suing us for libel that he was more interested in protecting himself. Kids on the run. A lot of young people who want to get out of the situation vote with their feet and run away. They often steal or sell their bodies to survive. They often get arrested, or is normally the case. Either they end up in sex rings and pimps, being beaten up, sometimes murdered. They steal to survive, and then they get arrested. They run away from situations that are intolerable. Sometimes they catch diseases such as HIV and AIDS, basically costing them their life after such a miserable life in care. All in all, as a result of coming into care, they receive loss of innocence, exposure to life experience beyond their years, loss of trust and lack of love and affection. Often a total failure to prepare them for life outside the system. Aside from the cases of individual abuse, we also came across a number of places where there was organised exploitation of young people for sex and porno rings. Often the organisers were the carers, and as we discovered, held together by people much higher up than we ever imagined. We have discovered all this since January as part of our research. Research being a credible way of saying to people, yes, it goes on. As we've basically tried before to do so. It's very dangerous research, and it needs support financially as well as people helping out. Because we've only got 2 workers. And to keep discovering the reality of sexual abuse within the care system. The problem with disclosing in the system is there's nowhere to run. And the problem for people who actually want to help is it's actually illegal to harbour runaways. So we're in a very difficult position when we get a young person who's saying, I'm being abused in a home, because we can't actually put them anywhere. We can't say, right, get out now and we'll deal with it. They actually have to stay in that situation. It's not like the care system. It's not like being abused at home where they actually say, all right, we'll put you into the care system, which is out of the firing into the frying pan, basically. But we haven't got anywhere, and I think that we need safe houses, and I think we need to be organised as lots of voluntary groups to get those safe houses, because it's very difficult when you go to organisations that maybe have become part of a statutory body that maybe are working with social services now instead of, we work with social services like, we do, but we care, number one, for the young people, and we're not scared of treading on people's toes, even if it does get up their noses sometimes. But we need to organise safe houses, and I think, I don't know how many voluntary organisations are here that come across young people. Young people phone us up, they hear us and they hear about us, and they phone us up because we're young people who've been in the same position, because we do know what we're talking about. Like I said yesterday, I was talking about how it was organised. The guy stood up and said, no, it's not. The other young people who'd been in care all came to me after the conference and said, you're all right, it is organised, and actually, it's going on in our place. And that's what happens to me every time. I ever do talk to any young people, I ever visit a children's home, I ever go anywhere where there is young people in care, all I've got to mention is sexual abuse, and they're all like, oh yeah, I know it happens. It's rife. People have got to start believing that. Anyway, safe houses. The other thing is we need a proper complaints procedure. So that people can complain. There's no point in complaining to the social services if they're the people that you're complaining about. We need organised agencies to investigate and a big network established. You've got to be very careful who you talk to about the problem. You wouldn't ask someone you didn't know or have checked out to rob a bank with you, would you? So basically, if you put kids at, you don't, I don't trust everybody. When I'm investigating a case, I certainly don't shut my mouth off about it and say, oh, I'm doing this, and this. I might give hints, but I certainly wouldn't give away the information. Because if something's well organised, and I'm saying, oh, we're just about to investigate it, Here we are, we're just about to investigate. The blocker's going to go on. I mean, people want to protect what makes money, what gives them their perverted kicks. People want to protect that. So certainly when you're investigating things, and you've got to be proactive, but you've got to be undercover too. And you've got to be careful who you trust. So we need some kind of network where we realise that, the people there will stick their necks out. They don't care if they lose their job for it. Yeah? A lot of people are too concerned about being demoted or, losing their jobs and things like that. The issue is that young people are being sexually abused. Yeah? The police, they will always protect each other unless they can stand out, unless they can stand up and not care about losing their jobs and say, yes, but I'll protect that young person because I care that young people are sexually abused. I just wanted to say a bit about what Ray Wire said yesterday about abusers being victims. I understand what he was getting at. I do understand that it does stop the problem of abusers reoffending again to actually give them some kind of aversion therapy. But I think it's the wrong terminology to see them as victims when you just heard what I've said about victims in the care system. I think they're the real victims. And I think it's probably the wrong time at the moment to be talking about what we should do to the offenders, I think he has got a point that they should have some kind of, aversion therapy or therapy to help them out and they've been abused before. But shit, I've been abused before. I don't go out and molest kids, It's the thing, basically, either you're sick in the head, which you need psychiatric help for, but you know that there's rights and wrongs to life. I don't go out and commit a criminal offence tomorrow. You know why? I don't go out and rob a bank. I don't get £1 million tomorrow. You know why? Because I might be caught and banged up for years. It's fear that stops people. And I think when we start imposing tough sentences on child abusers, it's then that we might see something change. The thing about it is, an offender will go out and he will, what was his name? He said they were calculated. And I know my dad's calculated. I know, so many people are calculated when they abuse, right? Now they will think to themselves, well, what's the chances of me getting caught? Well, it's not very likely, is it? Then if I do get caught, then I might get a couple of years therapy. Oh, yeah, that'd be all right. That's definitely worth the risk. If I can get a sexual kick out of it, that's worth the risk because I will just get therapy for it. What makes Ray Wire think that if that person is so calculated, so evil and so calculated, that they can't pretend to be sorry for what they've done? What makes him know for sure that when he puts them back out on the street after they are miraculously cured, they are not going to reoffend again? They might be just a little bit cleverer about the way they go about it. Is that it? All right. Fear will stop it. Oh yeah, I just wanted to say, the police have something called Neighbourhood Watch. It's proactive. The police have something called Neighbourhood Watch, and it's proactive. I think there's a lot of people out there who actually want to stop something like this. I think that we should organise to stop it. And, people actually want to talk, but they don't know who to talk to. Like me, I wouldn't talk to the police unless I have them completely checked out and I know who I'm talking to. Yeah, because I don't want to put a victim's life, I don't want to put a young person's life at risk that they might get in trouble for me telling. We need a network that is confidential and that people can actually investigate properly. And that's what I'll finish with. Thank you.